Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the latest episode of Miss Marvel, Crushed. And, unfortunately, my kind of attitude towards Miss Marvel has also extended to this episode. I don't know what it is. Um, Most of it, I think, is just your typical kind of sitcom TV cliches that aren't really given much to do with. Like, I don't get enough flavor on certain characters for it, mainly in reference to Kamala Khan. Like, she is the least interesting character to me. Like, there's other characters around her that I am more interested in than her, which is really kind of bad. Like, she's really, she is the stereotype of a scatterbrain, which is really kind of odd to kind of say. It's just she's just doing everything, doing stuff with her powers, sometimes daydreaming of certain other kind of stuff, and it's just okay. But other characters seem to have more kind of a grip on who they are or other kind of goals that they have. Even though we do have a fucking love triangle instituted in this episode, it's fuck me. It's really kind of weird because normally I'm okay with bridging a gap and understanding the youthful perspective and the kind of older perspective. But here I was more with everybody else except her and even the parents. The parents were talking about her brother's wedding and how they loved Bon Jovi. And they're oh, okay. And then their first stance would be living on a prayer. And the brother's hey, at least it's not you give love a bad name. Or his fiance was about that. It's just oh. And they're talking about yeah, you might not even be here if it wasn't for slippery when wet. And I'm all right, respect. Because the thing is, we get to it that's an example of a pop culture thing that kind of works, because if you can latch onto it and understand it, that's okay. However, you need the context of that, because you're oh, okay, they're in Jersey, it makes sense that one of the big Jersey bands they'd be into, you know what I mean? Now granted, I'm not in Jersey, but I'm into that period of rock and roll and stuff, and well, I'm into rock and roll in general, so of course I'm going to be into that shit. But a big kind of issue is that they make Kamala Khan a pop culture vomiting entity. And if you don't have context or don't understand what's going on with that, you're just oh, okay. It's like an inside joke that you don't get. And if you're not in with that joke, you then start to tune shit out. And it's a gradual kind of thing. You know what I mean? Now, granted, I'm watching it to understand and get to it, but that still doesn't change the fact that sometimes I'm shit, getting bored. What's going on? Nothing of consequence. Shit. Fuck. Pop culture reference? Yeah, but they're not going to give you any kind of context to understand or have any kind of explanation. Now, granted, that does not mean that I need a character to say some kind of pop culture thing and vomit a Wikipedia article about the whole thing. What they were talking about the partition of India and Pakistan. I'm oh, okay, this is I like learning about that kind of shit. You know what I mean? I'm oh, okay, and how people were separated and what they kind of did between with the people that lived there and those that left and immigrated to other places, and them kind of passing down that kind of information and history. I'm ooh, that's kind of cool. Now, granted, they kept it very surface level, but I'm yes, can I learn some more? Because evidently that's very pivotal to Kamala's great grandmother, who evidently brought great shame. All right, I know I was kind of jumping in and jumping around of different kind of things, but that stuff's in the episode. So we pretty much begin off her acting I don't know, just being weird at school, and I'm okay, I kind of get it, but I'm all right, you found a bangle that gave you powers, and now you're yeah. I kind of get it, but I'm she's doing all this kind of stuff that you see other kind of superheroes do with it, and I'm just it's kind of weird. I'm I can understand being giddy and everything like that, but you're just interacting with students in different kind of ways, and people are not what the fuck is kind of going on with you? if you act and then you have the proper kind of like strange reactions of like what the fuck, because normally people would be like, hey, what's going on here, like she corrected a teacher and all that kind of stuff. I'm just like, all right, I kind of get it, but it's like it's the same kind of thing that I've kind of seen all the time before, and there's no kind of different enough spin on it to be like, uh-huh, okay. Now granted, I've seen a fuck ton of superhero shit, seen a fuck ton of other kind of movie shit that kind of done the same kind of thing. So yes, my age and my experience does lend that to that kind of reaction to it. So I get that, and I have to take that into account. But it just really didn't add anything other than her just being like, hey, this kind of montage thing. And they're talking about their history kind of stuff, and she starts kind of training with her powers and all that, and trying to learn more about them. Bruno is accepted into this Caltech thing, and of course we pretty much understand that he's got feelings for Kamala. I mean, he's been like glued to her side since the first episode. Granted, I understand this is episode 2, but we see that he's been with her family and doing stuff with their holidays as well, so it's like, oh, okay, cool. Her training montage is the same kind of stuff, but we get the information that she already had a superpower within her, and the Bengal just kind of activated it. So they're essentially trying to, like, bridge the gap between her inhuman kind of stuff in the comics and what they're trying to do here. I'm just like, alright, cool, do whatever. And they essentially make the shit Hard Light, and that pretty much is a superhero name at a certain point. Let's see. Zoe is now famous because of all this stuff and gets more followers, and Kamala's like, hey, that'd be kind of cool too. And then we see this exchange between Cameron pop up, and she gets googly eyes at him. And she's like, let's not go to Zoe's party. And then Zoe's like, hey, new dude, do you want to come to my party? And he's like, sure, yeah, all right. And then she's like, all right, we're going to that party. And then let's see. These are the main events. We also see that Kamala and Nakia go to this mosque, and that was kind of cool. I like learning about that kind of stuff and seeing these separated areas between men and women. And the thing is that, like, religious services are the same everywhere. You got the people who are actually listening. You got the young people there, like, why the fuck are we here? And we got these, like, 2 young ones doing stuff on their phones. It's always like, stop Snapchatting. And it's like, oh, we're Instagramming. And it's like, okay, if this is any point after Endgame, they would be on to a new social platform. Because I lived through, like, the expanse of Instagram, and it's almost kind of like, I can understand, like, a certain, probably, you get that kind of youthful churn of, like, you got your older people kind of leaving, being like, this thing's fucking stupid and bogus anymore. And granted, you would also kind of think that, like, younger, newer kind of social media would be, like, influenced, because younger people would be like, new hotness, motherfucker, new hotness, and doing other kind of stuff, because this older lady's like, stop Snapchatting, and I'm like, yeah, that would probably be more of the centralized kind of focus if it got better and got big enough and Instagram got, like, kicked in the nuts or whatnot. But that was just an interesting interaction as they're, like, talking amongst themselves, and that Nakia decides to run for, like, there's a board thing, election in the mosque. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and that they're going to try and implement changes and stuff like that. It's just the dialogue that mainly gets, like, Nakia's dialogue actually works. It's Kamala Khan's that just is like, alright, cool. It just goes too hard on, like, awkward to the point of cringe sometimes. And I'm just like, I do not like listening to you unless it's for certain kind of, like, plot things that actually work out. Alright, did that. That becomes important later on, because then they try and use it for her to gain info on her great-grandmother. So, we understand Kamala's parents on the certain kind of aspect. She got caught sneaking out last episode. Alright? Why am I explaining this? Because then she helps her mother with, like, one thing, just moving things that are already, like, hey, you brought these in the house, let me help you with these. And then puts them, like, 2 feet away from him, and then asks her mother to go to a party. And that Bruno will be there, and Nakia will be there. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. I'm like, she was probably going with, like, half of those people to the Avengers Con. Why the fuck would you let her go to this party thing, but not the Avengers Con? And the thing is, I thought you didn't trust her, and like she has proven that distrust by fucking sneaking out and sneaking back in. And it's just because the plot demanded that they go to the party so that she could make googly eyes at Cameron and then escape in the cops, and that she could geek out over their kind of stuff with like Bollywood and all that. I did like that they name dropped an Eternal Kingo after a certain point. But yeah, they get to the party. We see Cameron do this fucking cannonball thing. Bruno acts like a fucking tool because it's plot demanded. Like, the thing is, I don't mind if a character acts like an asshole. However, when it's essentially premeditated on, like, the stereotype of, like, oh, I secretly am in love with my friend and I'm just gonna act like an asshole, and that's pretty much the extent that you, like, delve into it, I get bored with that. And it doesn't really... It introduces annoying conflict on my part, not within the narrative's part for me. I'm just like, I don't care. I want this to be done, and I want this to be over with. So, they then escape the cops because the party gets closed like that because... I don't know. I'm just like, budgetary reasons. You're like, you got all these people here. Whatever. So, they fly off in his uncle's car. They, Kamala and Cameron, like, they put a lot of people in that fucking car. Like, I'm like, alright. They're geeking out about some Bollywood films and stuff like that, and then Bruno tries to insert himself and go like, whoa, whatever. So they pretty much get to, like, Bruno's kind of place, correctly names everybody else except him, and then they kind of splinter off. We also see that Damage Control has contacted Zoe and has one of the most awkward, fucking, cringy ass dialogue laden things. As the one dude, Cleary, is trying to get info on like the hard light lady, then his partner is just acting like a goddamn tool, just like whatever, fine. And then they decide to pretty much, like no evidence other than maybe the video. I mean, Zoe wasn't even like used for it. Like they just start to be like, hey, let's kind of target like the Southeast Asian community and just see if we can find this person. I'm like, that sounds like a gross fucking misuse of resources because you don't even have a fucking understanding of who you're looking for, but fucking go for it. Not that I'm saying that you shouldn't investigate certain things, but I mean, you didn't even really ask her enough pertinent questions to get kind of information out of her to, like, narrow down anything to be like, hey, maybe they, like, go to your school, or they talk to you, or you could give any kind of other information that would narrow down the search than any fucking person of Southeast Asian descent of which she never even gave anything on. Alright. So, Kamala pretty much hangs out with Cameron. Bruno was going to try and tell her stuff about Caltech, but she's like, hey, he's going to give you driving lessons. And I'm like, everybody's like, yeah, she backed up into a car. Why the fuck would you do that with that, like, nice-ass car? It's like, whatever. And she kind of drives weirdly, and they're just, like, tooling around, talking more. Her brother kind of sees them and, like, interrogates them. She pulls some bullshit that's like, hey, it's a cousin family fucking thing. And then he's able to, like, switch between, like, his English accent and a Pakistani accent. And it's like, okay, there's more of this dude. And they were talking funny also before to be like, hey, yeah, my mom and, like, my grandmom are into fucking, like, Kingo, like, different versions of it. It's like, oh, interesting. I like that, like, an actual Eternal's getting, like, name dropped and everything like that. So I'm like, interesting. Then she's just pretty much goes also into investigation mode to figure out what's going on. She was having a dinner and then saw like this vision of this lady and passed out, and everyone was like, what the fuck's going on? So she tries to talk to her grandma FaceTime wise, and her grandma's like, I don't know what the fuck's going on with you. And the dad tries to come in and be like, hey, Kamala, what the fuck are you doing? And she like uses his power to keep the door closed and then fakes some shit up. And then her grandma's like, I ain't fucking talking to you about this shit. And like she also tries to get her out of her mom about it. She's like, she brought shame upon this family. And it's like, yeah, I pretty much want to know about what the fuck's going on with this fucking thing that's giving me some fucking powers, badoo. So, then this holiday pops up, and they decide to kind of like go to this kind of like festival kind of thing. Bruno joins them, and They help with Nakia, pretty much trying to like do her kind of thing. That's in the background, but honestly, I'm more interested in her doing that shit than what Kamala's doing at this point, which really fucking sucks because I would just kind of like to learn more information about like her family and stuff rather than her. Like, and it's not even really like the complete age difference or whatnot. It's just like the basis of the character. I'm like, tell me about the other stuff. And she's like, they had the Illuminantes. I'm like, alright, I get it. And they're just like, oh, she did all this stuff and the other. It's like, yeah, she also fucking killed a dude. It's like that escalation of every kind of gossip thing. I'm like, yep, had to go there. And she's pretty much getting no information. She's like, alright. And then I don't know where this kid is pretty much falling. Like this kid decided to take a selfie outside of a tower for some reason, and the only reason I can fucking figure out that this was going on for is that the plot demanded that this kid get into trouble so that way Kamala had to save his ass. That's it. It's like, I've fallen, help me. It's like, yeah, okay. That's not that I want the kid to die, or like, I'm like questioning him being in trouble or whatnot. It's just, it's so blatant. It's like, hey, we need to have her use her powers and shit. And she runs out, and even though we didn't see her like suit or anything on her and her mask, she pops up out dressed in her Captain Marvel kind of stuff. It's like, alright. So she uses her powers, pretty much gets him to safety. However, she has another vision of this lady who's like, what the fuck's going on? Loses control of her powers for a little bit, and then is still able to kind of like juggle him down before he hits the car. And I'm just like, alright, that was plot ordained for that to happen too. Like, it's the execution of everything. I don't mind that it happens. Just the way that happens is like, I could have timed my watch and been like, alright, she's almost rescued this kid, so we got a plot ordained thing about to happen to make sure she fucks that shit up. And there. And she then starts running away. The kid says, ow, my ankle. It's like, alright, yeah, you do need training on your shit, but you pretty much had him locked until the plot said, hey, suck it. And she kind of almost gets caught by damage control, but she gets out of there because of Cameron, and then he's like, hey, yeah, meet my mom. And the mom is the person that she's seen in her vision things, and that's where the episode ends. I'm just not that interested in her character, which is odd for me. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, the scatteredness of her, how sometimes when she's connected to certain plot things, I am okay with it, whereas other ones, I'm just like, what the fuck? Mainly because it's the crafting of her dialogue and the crafting of her situations. Like, granted, I understand that I haven't been a teenager for many moons. However, there are universal experiences for teenagers, but there are like those people that have gotten so far away from a teenage kind of experience that they just do the fucking stereotypes of what a teenage experience is and try to craft dialogue on that. Very comes off much along the lines of, hey fellow kids kind of shit, where I'm just like, alright. I doubt any kid, like, it doesn't, even though certain things that they talk about change, it doesn't really change that much. Old people gripe about young people with their young people things, and young people gripe about old people with their old people things. It's been around. It's a universal constant. It's always going to fucking happen. You know what I mean? And it just is like, hey, this is the stereotype, all this shit going on, and it's just like, alright. Like a basic amount, like, oh, you're doing this stuff, that stuff. She had to hide her powers from Nakia. And then we get some info on like her, how she's like, I'm too white or I'm too ethnic, me wearing the hijab and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And your character is more interesting to me than this character who's got the powers. It's really strange. I don't know why I'm like drawn to all of like the supporting cast and all the people around except for her. And I don't like, it's just the way she's executed and how her dialogue comes across, I think. And how her situations resolve themselves. Like, she needed to be the asshole to get punished, to be like, you're not going to AvengerCon. even though her parents pretty much had a compromise. Like, if they had talked out a little bit, it would have worked out. And then this party is like, oh yeah, you snuck out, but there's no consequences to this. Like, she didn't get grounded or anything like that. I'm like, all right, then why is it? Is it a big deal then? If you're not gonna like punish her for it, well, what's the big deal? Like, she goes to school, she fucking drives around with that dude. Those weird things of like the plot needing her to do certain things and then either escaping certain consequences or getting certain consequences because of what is deemed to be going on. It's very fucking weird. So that's why I'm really just big on this. It doesn't seem to be introducing any kind of gigantic concepts except getting a little bit more about damage control and how they completely and utterly fucking suck at their job. So at this point I would still be like, if you are heavily invested in the Ms. Marvel character and from the comics, sure, go for it. I hope you enjoy it and I hope you're liking it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to take that shit from you, man. Do you? However, if you're like, just, I only want to watch things that have kind of like bigger kind of significance on the MCU or things that I'd like, try episode 1 first, and if you can't get past that, I don't think you're going to be missing anything. Kind of like with Moon Knight. Yeah. Yep. So we'll kind of have to see. Now, granted, there are still more episodes. There could be a turnaround or whatnot, but well, we're almost halfway through this, so that's kind of a taller order for this show to be able to accomplish at that point. So those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.